Good Monday morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Stephen Romo in for Savannah Sellers today. And right now on Morning News Now, face-off. Developing this morning, signs of progress in the debt ceiling standoff. Today, President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are set to meet at the White House as the default deadline looms.
How hard is this June 1st deadline?
We expect to be unable to pay all of our bills in early June. Think that that's a hard deadline.
We'll have the latest on what today's meeting could signal and the effect this standoff is already having even before reaching that catastrophic default. Also this morning in the running, a new contender is officially joining the race for president. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott will launch his campaign today. And another big name, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, is expected to join him this week in the GOP primary battle against Donald Trump. More on Scott's announcement today and how he will try to set himself apart from the pack. And a breakthrough, a stunning arrest in a cold case murder that had been unsolved for decades. How a group of student investigators helped authorities make an arrest. Plus more on the program, which has already had similar success. One giant leap. History is unfolding in space at this hour as a private flight makes its way to the International Space Station with an impressive crew on board. How SpaceX's successful launch could affect the future of space tourism. A lot to get to this morning.
Exactly. We have our favorite resident astronaut, Mike Massimino, joining us to go through that.
Is perfect. All right. We do, though, begin this morning in Washington in a hopeful sign that there could be some progress in that debt ceiling standoff.
President Biden will meet with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy at the White House for negotiations aimed at averting a potentially crippling default. The president arrived in Washington last night after a shortened trip overseas to the G7 summit in Japan. With just 10 days to go before that June 1st deadline when the U.S. may not be able to pay its bills, every day is critical now. Even before arriving home, the president spoke with McCarthy on the phone while flying back on Air Force One. The House Speaker called that conversation productive. That is a significant change in tone from earlier this week when the president called out Republicans for pausing talks.
Now it's time for the other side to move from their extreme positions because much of what they've already proposed is simply quite frankly, unacceptable. It's time for Republicans to accept that there is no bipartisan deal to be made solely on their partisan terms.
NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us now. Kelly, good morning to you. So today's meeting is a good sign, but both sides are still pretty far apart. So give us a sense of where talks currently stand and how far they have to go to reach a deal.
Good morning, Joe. This is a chance to sort of reboot talks with the principals in the room together, with the president back from his Asia trip. And what is critical now is the limited time left. Pressure in Washington sometimes creates a movement where there hadn't been some. It was a rough weekend with negotiators, the two teams that have been working on a lot of the details. And so today the president will get back to that face-to-face with McCarthy. That'll happen sometime this afternoon. Imagine his body clock is still a bit off from just traveling back from Asia. While the president was there and taking questions from reporters, he described some of what's at stake here.
It would be a very serious circumstance if we didn't pay our debt for the first time in 230 years. That'd be a serious problem. Looking at the 14th Amendment as to whether or not we have the authority, I think we have the authority. The question is, could it be done and invoked in time that it would not be appealed and as a consequence past the date in question and still default on the debt?
So there the president's referring to a clause in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that says that the government must pay its bills. And is that a way to bypass the kind of partisan gridlock that's going on now? You heard the president say he thinks there's potentially a legal pathway there, but not in the time allowed, just that little over a week until the deadline as described by the Treasury Secretary. Joe?
Hey, let's talk about the Treasury Secretary, Kelly. For weeks we've been reporting she warned that June 1st is the deadline where the U.S. will have to make some tough choices about which bills it will pay, which ones it won't pay. Is she sticking to that date?
At this point, yes, but we are expecting another assessment. And part of what happens here, this isn't a fixed date on the calendar. It's a formula that she and her team work on based on how much revenue is coming into the government through tax payments and so forth, and looking at the set of bills and obligations that the government must pay. And when she does that math, she's saying on or about June 1st, the ability to pay all of the U.S. obligations, and that is, of course, repaying debt. It's meeting the obligations to veterans and seniors and so forth. She believes that's when things will become critical. So it is not a fixed date on the calendar, but one that she's got a lot of data to tell her that's when it's a crisis point. Here's what the secretary said on Meet the Press.
Well, I indicated in my last letter to Congress that we expect to be unable to pay all of our bills in early June and possibly as soon as June 1st. But I certainly haven't changed my assessment. So I think that that's a hard deadline.
And the secretary says she expects a lot of money coming in around June 15th, but that may be too late to avert default. Joe?
All right, Kelly, and of course, stand by. We're keeping you busy this morning. We're going to bring you in for our next story as well. Stephen?
And speaking of that next story, Joe, in Ukraine this morning, Russia is claiming victory in the war-torn city of Bakhmut. Russian state media reports President Putin there congratulated Russian troops on their victory. State TV also broadcast pictures of soldiers celebrating, which NBC News has not been able to independently verify. A top Ukrainian commander visiting the city's front line acknowledged his troops only retained a, quote, insignificant part of the city. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy denied that Russia controlled the city, but compared the situation there to the horror Hiroshima faced during a meeting with the G7 leaders in Japan.
But you have to understand that there is nothing. They destroyed everything. There are no buildings. It's a pity, it's tragedy, but for today, Bakhmut is only in our hearts. There is nothing on this place.
Oh, for more on this, we want to bring it back in NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. And she's joined by senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis. Thank you both for sticking with us for this. And Kelly, let's start with you. What is the White House saying about this victory that Russia's claiming?
Well, there's great concern, of course, when they're looking at the lay of this theater of war. And Bakhmut is not fully in Russian control, according to the Ukrainians. The U.S. can't independently determine that. But you got a sense from President Zelensky's tone there, his concern, and certainly the White House shares that. At the same time, there were big developments at the G7 with President Zelenskyy meeting in person with President Biden and other leaders, and movement on things like supplying and training the pilots of the Ukrainian military for F-16s that can be provided by U.S. partners, with the U.S. doing training, and the critical need that may be for the next phases coming in this war. There's a lot of concern about the timing right now, how best to supply Ukraine. Clearly, the president feels that the unity of the G7 is strong, and that was certainly enhanced by President Zelenskyy being able to be there in person and to make his case. But the development in Bakhmut is certainly concerning. The Wagner Group made this announcement about claiming that waving the flag, all of that kind of stuff that certainly gives you a sense of how brutal this battle has been for many months to try to claim that city in Ukraine. Stephen?
So, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, strategically, how important is Bakhmut to Ukraine, and what type of response do you expect to see from this?
You know, the real issue with Bakhmut is not so much the tactical location, because it's just one of many cities in the area of Donetsk. But the bigger issue may have been that in order to try and hold on to the city, Ukraine has for many months, really since December, I think many military experts were saying that they should have withdrawn to their next prepared level of defenses. But they decided to hold on to it. And in doing so, they have poured in many, many brigades of reinforcements to try and hold it, brigades that have now been lost and that are no longer available for their upcoming offensive. And so in that sense, the loss of Bakhmut may be much more significant to Ukraine because of the lack or the lesser offensive firepower they'll now have.
And speaking of firepower, Kelly, you mentioned earlier the F-16s. We also know the $375 million aid package from the U.S. But regarding those fighter jets, this is something Ukraine has been asking for such a long time. Do we know why the White House has sort of shifted their opinion on the international community providing these?
Well, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, describes it as assessing different needs during the course of what has now become a very long war, 15, 16 months, and that they believe that there are different phases of that where different tools in the theater of war are more effective. The U.S. has clearly resisted that in part because they were concerned that F-16s, these very agile fighter jets, could escalate the conflict and be used in a more offensive way against Russia, which could bring in others like NATO, like the United States, into a wider conflict. The U.S. has not wanted that to be the case. And the president says he has gotten assurances from President Zelenskyy that these jets and the support that the U.S. provides for them will only be used in a defensive way to guard the skies over Ukraine and not widen the battlefield or make this conflict even more dangerous than it already has been. Stephen?
So, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, just how effective do you think the F-16s can actually be for Ukraine? They've been on that wish list for such a long time now. Could this be a game changer?
You know, honestly, we got to keep a sober understanding of what this aircraft can do. And it is certainly an improvement over anything that they have, like the MiG-29s in the Ukrainian Air Force. But it is not a game changer. The F-16s are very vulnerable to Russian, both their modern aircraft, the MiG-31s and the Su-35s, as well as the S-400 anti-aircraft systems. And they're certainly going to continue to be at risk anytime they go in the air, just like the MiG-29s have been up to this point. So I think we need to have an understanding that this is not going to be a game changer. It'll be an improvement, and certainly the Ukraine can use any improvement it can get, but we need to be clear-eyed about this.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis, thank you both. To the race for president now, where the growing field of Republicans running for their party's nomination is about to get larger today.
Republican Senator Tim Scott is expected to announce that he is running. He'll make it official at an event in his hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. But Scott and others face an uphill battle against former President Trump, who is already actively campaigning. NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray joins us now with more. Mark, good morning to you. So Senator Scott and other GOP candidates, they face a tough task going up against former President Trump. So how is he positioning himself in a race that's getting more crowded and has a front runner who just takes up a lot of oxygen?
Yeah, Joe, Senator Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, was first appointed to his position by Nikki Haley, who also is running for the Republican presidential race. And he ended up decisively winning re-election just in the last midterm season. His advisors believe that he is one of the party's best communicators and messengers. They cite the fact that he hails from South Carolina, which, as you know, is one of the very early primary battlegrounds in the race for the Republican nomination. He has a lot of resources. He has more than about $22 million cash on hand after his Senate re-election from 2022, which he can use in his presidential account. And then they just ended up citing all the unpredictability in this race. And if you recall, this stage back in the 2016 cycle, before Donald Trump ended up getting into the race, there was the thought that Jeb Bush or someone like Scott Walker, then the Wisconsin governor, were the early front runners. And of course, that ended up changing. So we have a long ways to go. And Senator Scott's team believe they can actually stack up against Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis.
So, Mark, one issue that Scott could be facing is the name recognition issue. You mentioned Nikki Haley. Of course, she was part of the Trump administration, also a fellow South Carolinian. How can Scott sort of tackle that issue?
Yeah, that's where the money comes in, Stephen. The $22 million that I ended up mentioning earlier, the Scott campaign is actually going to be launching a very early $6 million ad buy to introduce himself to Republican primary voters, those who actually might not be familiar with him. And also, after his announcement that we're going to end up seeing in South Carolina, you're going to see the South Carolina senator go to Iowa, go to New Hampshire, and then back to South Carolina.
Let's talk about DeSantis. You mentioned him as governor. He quickly passed laws in Florida, shaping it into a state where, as he put it, woke goes to die. Well, now the NAACP is issuing a travel advisory. They issued it over the weekend, saying the state is hostile to Black Americans. So does it actually help him in a primary campaign? And if he does get the nomination, looking at this issue, the anti-LGBTQ legislation, the abortion bill, how does he pivot to a general election campaign?
Yeah, Joe, it probably does help him. And of course, this is actually caught up in the politics. And it is in response to the legislation that DeSantis has signed into law, eliminating things like diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the state of Florida, rejecting AP courses in African-American studies. And so the NAACP has actually said that Florida is hostile towards African-Americans. But yes, this is caught up in presidential politics. And the question on whether this actually helps or hurts him in a general election, well, he's got to actually win a Republican presidential primary first. And the polls show right now that Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner in that race. But we have months to go.
And of course, we're waiting for him to make that official to enter the race. All right, Mark Murray. Mark, thank you so much.
And staying with the presidential politics now, Donald Trump is leading in most polls for the Republican nomination, and he's also picking up some key endorsements, including a congressman from Florida who's choosing not to back Ron DeSantis. Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd spoke to him this weekend.
Hello there, Joe and Stephen. This week on Meet the Press, Republican Congressman from Florida, Byron Donalds, joined me to discuss his support of former President Trump over his state's governor, Ron DeSantis, in the 2024 presidential race. Take a look at what the congressman had to say about it.
To me, it's not really about Donald Trump versus Ron DeSantis. It's about what America needs. And that's where I've been really since day one. I talked a little bit about foreign policy in the last block. We have a situation right now where Russia's on the move and China is on the move. We need somebody who can step in day one, look at Vladimir Putin, look at Xi Jinping and say, okay, enough. I'm back. We're going to get everything in order the way it was before. You don't think DeSantis has that ability? I think it's going to take him time. I think there's only one person who has that ability right now, and it's Donald Trump. And for all the naysayers who would say, oh, he's unpredictable, oh, we don't know what he's going to do, let's be very clear. When he was president of the United States, the world was in a much safer place. Nobody can say that the world is safer now than when it was when he was president.
He called January 6th a beautiful day. That is not something many people associate January 6th with. You really think that's an electable position?
Look, I think what happened on January 6th was a terrible day for the country.
You don't think it was a beautiful day?
I was on the House floor. Yeah. It was a terrible day for the country. But that also being said, we have a situation where we got to get the country back on track. I made a comment the other day that as bad as January 6th was, the American people aren't consuming January 6th the way the media in Washington is consuming January 6th. Our country has to get back on track.
Pretty scarring in Washington. In fairness to Washington, it was a pretty scarring day for Washington.
It was. But what's happening at our southern border right now? That's scarring for the people who live at the southern border. What's happening for middle-income families when their wages are being eroded by a massive inflation brought to us by Joe Biden? That is the stuff that the American people are concerned about right now.
You can see a lot more of that interview and a lot more of Meet the Press at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now every single weekday at 4 p.m.
We'll be watching. Chuck, thank you.
Let's get a check on your morning news now weather.
Yeah, meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now for a look at what's ahead. Hey, Michelle.
Good morning, guys. Great to see you. And we are tracking a few spots that will see showers, and that will kind of stay in place today, tomorrow, also Wednesday. So we're going to get stuck in some patterns. Other spots are really warming up into the 80s and 90s. So let's go through it here. We're looking at radar, showing us where the rain is falling. That's where you're seeing the green. Also the brighter color showing us the heavier rain. So some throughout the Pacific Northwest, the Intermountain West, portions of the central and southern plains, the Rockies as well. Then we're watching the southeast, some rain this morning. That's going to pick up as we go throughout today. This is a setup here. We have a disturbance moving through the middle of the country, at least the southern plains, Oklahoma, Texas. Could see some heavy rain. We're also looking at persistent rain along the Gulf Coast into the southeast. We could see 1 to 3 inches per hour and up to 7 inches of rain over the next several days. That's going to prompt the chance for some flash flooding there. It's going to prompt the chance for some flash flooding also in portions of the southern plains. So that pattern continues into the middle of the week. Unfortunately, we're looking at heavy rain at times. And the good news is we have a low risk for severe storms, but still could see some severe storms in the panhandle of Florida and also panhandle of Oklahoma and also Texas, where we could see winds really gusting up to 60 miles per hour. In terms of the rainfall, we're talking about a lot of rainfall over the next several days. Rainfall amounts where you see the heaviest amounts, that's in the reds, the oranges, the yellows. So hourly rates 2 to 3 inches possible. Panama City, Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, Fort Myers, down to Miami. You will see heavy rain over the next several days. And because of that, we have a flash flood risk today. That's portions of the southeast. And then notice the southern plains as well, portions of the central plains. That will be the concern over the next several days. This is tomorrow. It's going to stay in place. That disturbance will come through over and over again through portions of the southern plains. That's where we're going to see the chance for some rain, and also that front kind of draped over the southeast. We're looking at the chance for, again, up to 7 inches in some spots. Talking about severe weather, again, the risk is lower than it has been, but still could see some stronger storms, especially where you see the yellow shading. So Amarillo, Lubbock, we're looking at portions of Texas and Oklahoma. Could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour and could see some large hail. The good news is the tornado threat is low, though.
All right, very good. Michelle, thanks so much. Sure. Good to see you. Welcome back. Well over a year after Russia launched its war in Ukraine, the Kremlin is now finding itself growing more dependent on its most powerful next-door neighbor.
Yeah, China is now providing a critical economic lifeline for Russia's President Putin, with trade between the countries now surging. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer has those details.
Squeezed by Western sanctions, Russia is relying on its neighbor literally next door. We're on the Chinese border, and that's Russia, its flag just across the half-frozen river.
Here, the two countries are so close, Russia is just a few hundred yards away.
Along a 2,600-mile border, signs of deep China-Russia ties are everywhere. On streets and buildings, it's stores stocked with Russian goods, where vendors greet foreigners in Russian. There's even a Russian-style bar, where owner Teng Lu says Chinese people can mingle with Russians. China's President Xi Jinping declared a no-limits partnership with Russia. From that diplomatic boost for President Putin with a recent state visit, to a critical economic lifeline here. Trade between China and Russia surging by 30% in the last year. And this is where a huge pipeline delivers Russian gas to China, energy that used to flow to Europe. All of it keeping Russia's economy afloat and funding the war in Ukraine.
Trucks loaded with goods will come and go from Russia across this bridge that was built and paid for by China.
Russian truck drivers told us they're crossing to China every day. We're good friends, he says, of China. Still, relations during wartime are a sensitive topic here. We were tracked by Chinese authorities. U.S. officials, including the U.S. ambassador here, tell NBC News there is no evidence so far that China's support for Russia includes weapons. Russia needing allies like never before, and finding one close at hand. Janice Mackey-Frayer, NBC News, Heihe, China.
More international headlines now. Italy's prime minister is back early from an overseas trip to visit areas struck by deadly floods.
Claudio Lavanga joins us now from Rome with that and more. Good morning, Claudio.
Good morning, guys. Yes, Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni cut short her visit to Japan for the G7 summit to visit areas here in Italy most affected by the flooding and landslides last week that led to the death of at least 14 people and the evacuation of more than 30,000 more people. Now, the Prime Minister toured the towns in northern Italy and pledged to support the recovery. The Italian government plans to hold a cabinet meeting on Tuesday to decide on measures to respond to the emergency. And let's go to Mexico, where authorities have raised the warning level to a yellow phase 3 for one of the country's most active volcanoes. This comes after 2 airports in Mexico City temporarily halted their operations due to smoke and falling ash. The yellow warning says to remain alert and prepare for possible evacuation. The next step, a red alert, will trigger mandatory evacuations. Now, this volcano has not had a major eruption in more than a millennium, but has seen periods of increased activity since 1994. And we end up in France at the Cannes Film Festival, where most filmmakers in the competition lineup are well-known directors, but this year a Franco-Senegalese filmmaker is taking her debut film titled Bano and Adama into the competition. She's the sole first-timer in Cannes this year and the second black female director to ever compete for the Palme d'Or. However, to this, she said, "I'm a filmmaker and I really wish we stopped being counted as women, black, Arab, or Asian." Guys?
What an incredible moment in her career.
All right, Claudio, thank you. Welcome back. SpaceX is making history with a private space flight that's arriving at the International Space Station today.
The rocket successfully launched just after 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time last night from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It's being chartered by the private space company Axiom Space. Now, the crew on board includes the first woman ever to command a private space flight and the first female astronaut from Saudi Arabia. She and another crew member spoke about the experience after the launch.
Hello from outer space. It feels amazing to be viewing Earth from this capsule.
As I look outside into space, I can't help but think this is just the beginning of a great journey for all of us.
We're joined now by Mike Massimino, professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia University and senior advisor for space programs at the Intrepid Museum. Good to have you with us. So the crew's scheduled to dock at the International Space Station today. They'll spend 8 days there. What are some of the projects and things they'll be doing on this mission?
Well, Joe, they have over 20 projects planned, experiments in life sciences, in human adaptability to space, technology demonstrations, STEM outreach. They're going to be doing some downlinks with students. They have an art contest going on as well. So it's research, it's technology development, and it's also a lot of outreach that they're going to be doing. It's a real mission that they're going to be participating in for about 8 to 10 days.
A lot of science going on. Also, I'm very interested in these 3 private citizens who are joining this trip. Do they have to go through the similar training that astronauts have to go through?
Yeah, they do. So there's Peggy Whitten's a former astronaut, so they're all kind of private citizens, sort of, but 2 of the crew members are from Saudi Arabia, so they're Saudi Arabian astronauts. Their government is paying for them to go, and then there's 1 private citizen, John Schaffner, that's going. So they had to be trained on the SpaceX vehicle, which is a highly automated vehicle, so they had to go through that training. But unlike just going for a ride, they're also docking with the space station, so that part of it. And then getting into the space station, learning how to live in space, being able to make a meal, go to the bathroom, all the emergency procedures, and then the training on all these experiments they're going to be doing. So they had some pretty intense training, similar to what like a NASA astronaut would get, not necessarily like a life career where you're there for years training before you fly, but in a kind of an accelerated course, just what they needed to know. But it was still intense training for all of them.
We have seen commercial space exploration change so much in such a short period of time. This mission, what does it say or tell us about private space travel and really just private citizens heading into space?
It's another step in the commercialization of space. Saudi Arabia, for example, flew an astronaut. Has 1 person that went to space so far before this mission. That was in 1985. So now, and they've had the first woman Saudi Arabian citizen going to space on this mission. So it's a way for countries to get involved, to go to space. But the commercial aspect of it, which is probably most intriguing, this is truly a private astronaut mission. It was an agreement with NASA. They have 2 more of these missions planned over the next couple of years. And it's leading toward more commercialization of low Earth orbit, at least. Axiom, this company that was sponsoring this mission, is planning to build a space station, a commercial space station in space, as are other companies that are competing for that contract. So I think it's another one of these steps into the privatization of low Earth orbit, and NASA wants to concentrate on going to the moon and Mars and onward. So it's very exciting stuff. It's a changing atmosphere in the space program for sure, and we're seeing evidence of it here today.
And it seems like it's a little bit of a hybrid right now. We have people hoping for private space travel, but also trying to continue NASA's mission for exploration. What do you see going on later this year and in the coming years? Which one will maybe have more of an emphasis, or can you do both at the same time?
It's going to be both at the same time, Stephen. And NASA's not going to stop doing what they're doing. They've hoped to turn a lot of the space operations over to private industry. They wanted to do that with the space shuttle over 40 years ago when they started the space shuttle program that ended over 10 years ago. They wanted to make it a commercial program. It didn't work out that way. A couple accidents, it wasn't ready for that. But now we are ready for that, it appears. So NASA has been trying to encourage that. With private enterprise, they can operate differently than the government, and it allows them to pursue things that the government can't pursue, and the government can concentrate on other things. And as we see, as there's more opportunities, there's more demand, because now a private industry as well as governments can say, wow, we can be a part of this too. Before, it wasn't an option, even just a couple of years ago. And when you give people the option, they can think of ways to exploit that. Exploit's maybe not the best word, but they have a way to use it, to utilize space, to do these research projects, to help their prestige as a country, if it's a country going, or someone who has something they want to do commercially or for scientific research. It just opens up so many opportunities.
So cool. Mike Massimino, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Well, this morning, we're diving into the pressures professional athletes face and how it affects them mentally. We're nearly a third of the way into baseball season already, and several players have spent time on the injured list for their mental health, and that includes Colorado Rockies pitcher Daniel Bard. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch sat down with him to discuss why he needed to step away.
When you can throw a baseball close to 100 miles per hour, there's no question you're already a game changer. But this spring, Colorado Rockies star pitcher Daniel Bard changed the game in another way without throwing a single pitch.
Normally, I thrive under that pressure. When I started to feel like I was getting those same emotions, but they were becoming negative. They weren't helping me, they were hurting me. I knew something wasn't right.
Bard was battling anxiety ahead of opening day. He could have tried pushing through it, but instead, the 37-year-old reliever did something rarely seen in professional sports. He shared his struggle publicly, starting the season on the injured list to focus on his mental health. The Rockies say he missed 18 games before returning last month.
It was just the anticipation of having to perform every day and not feeling confident in my ability to do that thing.
Bard's one of 3 MLB players to openly take time off for their mental health this season. But that may be a serious undercount.
Teams will never admit it, but they come up with fake injuries all the time for players when they need a break.
Sports writer Danielle Allentuck says that can be for multiple issues, including mental health.
There are probably a lot more of them out there.
I think there's probably, dozens, 3 to 4 on every team every season.
So why did Bard speak up? He says it took some pressure off, looped in his teammates and fans, and helped him set an example for his kids.
Whether it's mental health or otherwise, just letting them know that you can face hard things, whatever that is.
So hopefully they'll speak up.
Hope so, or just, use it in their life to get through something.
After life's latest curveball, Bard's now back on the mound for the Rockies, an organization he says has been supportive.
Clubs are hearing and listening to what's happening with their players, no doubt about that. And they're hiring psychologists, mental skill coaches, people who are trained to help players in this regard.
The stigma has dropped, and so we are seeing more and more people saying, you know what, why wouldn't I work on this?
In a statement, Major League Baseball telling NBC, we've been proud of our longstanding work in this space to provide players with support. MLB says it also just launched a new youth-focused mental health and wellness program.
When things are good, you kind of walk out and you have this thought of, this is what I was born to do. I'm one of the best in the world. Let's go do this.
Bard's journey resonating with some fans.
I think it just sends an incredible message for those that also need help. And so it's like, well, if he can do it, I can do it.
If somebody has a tweaked a hamstring, you're not going to ask them to go sprint on it every day to see if it gets better. If you view mental health kind of the same way, especially in sports, but really in any area, I think you'll see a lot of these issues that deal with it and get back to being yourself.
Such an important conversation. Our thanks to Jesse Kirsch for that. Bard also made a point of saying he's had support from a lot of different people, but not everyone gets that. He, of course, hopes that changes. And for now, he says he'll continue to advocate for mental health even after he throws his last pitch. Welcome back. A community in Michigan could now have the answer to a decades-long cold case.
Nearly 35 years after her death, police think they know who killed 19-year-old Kathy Swartz. Robert Waters has been arrested and is now facing murder charges for the crime. And investigators were able to identify Waters thanks to the help of students in Western Michigan University's cold case program. This is now the program's second investigation that has ended with an arrest.
Pretty incredible. And joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Ashlyn Kirsten. She's a professor in the Criminal Justice Studies program at Western Michigan University. She's also the director of that cold case program. And we're also joined by Rachel Moore. She's a criminal justice major at the university. Good morning. Thank you both for joining us, and congratulations on that breakthrough. Professor Kirsten, let's start with you. So what goes into an investigation like this, and how did forensic genealogy, how did that help you close in on a suspect?
Good morning. Thank you for having us. What we do is work with the Michigan State Police. They give us a huge file, and we begin organizing it. In this case, 10,000 documents were organized and then scanned into a PDF that the detectives could keep on their phone or their tablet. And then we meet with the detectives every week and kind of get our marching orders of what they would like us to do, things that would help their investigation. In this case, it was DNA evidence that was left at the scene. So they were able to get a genealogy background on the person who was arrested. So it takes a lot of work to get to that point, but we were very happy with how it turned out.
No kidding. For the many people out there who love true crime, this class is probably a dream come true. I mean, Rachel, what's the experience been like for you as a student? I'm guessing it's pretty different from some of the other classes you're taking there at college.
Yeah, it's truly been incredible. I mean, we've seen cassette tapes, floppy disks, things that were here before I was even born. So this class gives a really good real world experience compared to my other classes. And I can apply these concepts to this class and go out and see actual professionals such as prosecutors, detectives, troopers. And it has allowed me to change my career path and has given me a great opportunity. And now I want to go into the Michigan State Police Academy because of this program. So it's been life-changing.
Wow, incredible, and also helping bring closure to some families who want answers. Professor Kirsten, this is some incredible success you've seen so far. Do you think other schools will try to start similar programs?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I've been traveling the country for the last year or so, advising other schools on how to create something like this. It's just like the perfect marriage of, a public university and the resources that go into that. Helping out the great public servants, our state police. And in the meantime, we are providing hopefully some closure to these victim family members. And then, of course, creating the next generation of law enforcement. These students in my program are learning from the very best that Michigan State Police has to offer. So I think it's a win-win all around for the public good.
You truly are creating the next generation. Rachel's a great example of that, changing her major to go into this. I mean, Rachel, for you, what's next? Do you hope to crack some more cases? Anything on the horizon here?
Oh, I hope so. I hope all the cases that we receive eventually are solved. It's such a credible experience, and what other program is able to put their hands on real cases from the 1970s, 80s, 90s. There's nothing else like this, so it's been an incredible opportunity.
And now you know what a floppy disk is. So
Yeah.
even better.
A wide-ranging education.
And a cassette tape.
And a cassette, that's right. All right, Dr. Ashlyn, Kirsten, Rachel Moore, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Financial headlines new this morning. Facebook parent company Meta is slapped with a record-breaking fine over its handling of users' data.
CNBC's Savannah Guthrie joins us with that and other news. Good morning, Savannah.
Stephen, Joe, good morning. That's right. So Meta Platforms has been hit with a record $1.3 billion fine by European regulators over its handling of users' information. Now, the fine comes after the Facebook parent continued to transfer data after a court ruling in 2020 that tossed out a pact between the EU and United States. Regulators are giving Meta 5 months to stop the practice, and in a statement, Meta says it will appeal, saying the fine sets a, quote, dangerous precedent for other companies. DoorDash is facing a lawsuit for allegedly charging iPhone users more than Android users for identical deliveries. Court documents include screenshots showing how iPhone users are charged an extra fee for, quote, expanded range. And DoorDash says that the fee helps customers preserve access to the available merchants that are farthest from them. But the lawsuit claims that the fee is tacked onto iPhone users' bills more often, and likely because studies reveal iPhone users earn more. A DoorDash spokesperson denies the allegations. And fast cars speed away with the box office crown. Fast 10 opens with $67.5 million in the U.S. and Canada this weekend and $251 million internationally. That's all according to ComScore. And it's a strong start for the latest film in the Universal Pictures franchise. International audiences have been the key to the success, with Fast 10 getting about 80% of its box office tally outside of North America. Fast and Furious films have earned Universal $6 billion worldwide, guys. How about that?
Not too shabby. I love how we've shortened it from the Fast and Furious.
Right?
We just now say Fast 10.
Just fast. Just fast. That's
10.
it.
All right. Thanks, Savannah. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
All right, let's take a closer look now at the debt ceiling standoff and the effect it could have on all of us.
President Biden is going to meet with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy today for more negotiations at the White House. But with 10 days to go before that default deadline, the stakes could not be higher. So helping us break it down, our good friend, Investopedia editor-in-chief, Caleb Silver. Caleb, good morning to you. So even 10 days out from the deadline, we're already starting to see some effects on certain parts of the economy. Talk to us about what those are. And we keep using the word catastrophic if we see a default here. Help us understand why we're using that word.
Yeah, good to be with you. And what we're worried about here is both a tightening in lending, which we're already seeing from the banks, which are pretty stressed out, but also the threat of a credit rating downgrade for the United States credit bonds. So we issue bonds to pay our debt. We've been doing that for centuries. Alexander Hamilton helped issue that in. And we usually pay our bills. That's why everybody wants to hold our treasury bills. But if we don't pay our debts, the yields on those are going to go up. And that's going to drive anything that's not fixed, like a credit card APR, that's going to drive those interest rates higher. So we're already dealing with very high interest rates right now. You guys know this. The Fed has been raising rates now for 10 straight meetings, and the effect of a potential downgrade on our debt is going to drive those yields higher. Plus, it's going to tighten lending. People are already very nervous about loaning money to one another. Banks loaning to one another as well is getting very tight.
So, Caleb, just a few weeks ago, the White House laid out several scenarios about what could happen to the stock market and the effects on unemployment, even if there's just a brief default here that would result in thousands of job losses and longer. We're talking millions of losses. So how would you suggest, like, individual Americans and families, how can they prepare for the worst case scenario?
Yeah, well, if you have a job, make sure you've secured that job. If you have outstanding debt, especially high interest rate debt, pay that off. That goes for any time of the year. But right now, if we're going to potentially see a spike in interest rates, especially credit card APRs, you're going to want to pay off that high interest debt right now. But we don't have a lot of control over these negotiations. Congress has voted to raise the debt ceiling 78 times in the past. Why they won't do it this time? There's political ill will there right now. So you have to brace yourself for this. Potentially make sure you have extra savings in line and also pay off that high interest debt, because we're going to probably see rates spike again if they don't get this deal done in time.
Caleb, as we talk about so often with you, the housing market has seen all this volatility over the last 2 years. We're seeing interest rates more than double in that time. That, of course, is because of what you were just talking about, because of inflation. The interest rates have been risen by the Fed. Explain to us some of the challenges that potential home buyers could face in the real estate market if we do get to this June 1st deadline and there's no deal.
Higher rates. We've seen that 30-year fix, which is the most popular mortgage financing product, more than double in just the last year and a half. So think about that for a first-time home buyer trying to get in at a mortgage that's at 6%, 6.5%, plus a big down payment. That monthly payment is now up some 90% from where it was a year ago. So for first-time home buyers, going to be hard to get into the housing market, especially if rates rise. If you're thinking about selling your home and you have an interest rate lower than 4%, you're not really in the mood to go out and sell your home and then buy a new home at a 6.5% 30-year fixed finance. So we're stuck here in the middle where sellers don't want to sell because they have lower rates. Buyers can't afford to buy because the rates have gone higher. And you've seen the housing market and sales go down for the last 14 months in a row.
All right, so much at stake here in the next 10 days. Caleb, thanks for helping us understand it. We appreciate it. Welcome back. We all know Cher doesn't look her age, and now we know she doesn't feel it either. The pop icon turned 77 over the weekend and took to Twitter on the big day, writing, "Okay, will someone please tell me, when will I feel old? This is ridiculous. I keep hearing these numbers, but I honestly can't understand them." Fans supported her with well wishes and encouraging comments, one Twitter user even calling her immortal. Because she is.
She absolutely is. Nobody else is.
I love it. She's the only person I know who's like, I don't feel old.
I know.
What's going on?
When will it happen? Yeah, I kind of love Cher. Yep. All right, Joe, thanks for that. Well, all through May, we've been celebrating the success of Asian Americans as part of AAPI Heritage Month. And finally this hour, we're focusing on the strides being made in pop culture. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has more on Asian Americans making their mark on the entertainment industry.
This year, Asians and Pacific Islanders have been smashing records and breaking stereotypes in pop culture and entertainment, a journey that has taken decades to achieve.
I am not who you think of when you imagine a winner. I finally realized that winners don't always have to look the same.
It began with pioneers like Martin Yan, one of the first people of Asian descent to host a cooking show in the U.S.
I remember when I first came over here, people always tell me, oh, you all look alike. But now you can tell, well, we don't all look alike.
I'm here on the gold carpet for the Gold Gala, an event celebrating AAPI Trailblazers, and I got to catch up with some of the biggest stars.
And among them, Sandra Oh. I spoke with the actress before her historic night at the 2019 Golden Globes, when she pulled double duty as co-host and award recipient. During our interview, we shared a unique kinship.
This experience right now for me is tremendous. I feel like I can feel change happening because we're talking.
I caught up with the actress again, this time as a Gold Gala honoree.
You know, I feel like a lot has changed since I last spoke with you. And what does it mean to be surrounded by so many other trailblazers?
Actually, tonight I'm really trying to take it all in. Honestly, all the projects that are coming up, it's just thrilling. And you know, I'm trying to really absorb that that I have been a part of it. And it's to be able to, I didn't think that I would be able to see this in my lifetime.
From Everything Everywhere All at Once, winning big at the Oscars, with Michelle Yeoh becoming the first Asian lead to win Best Actress, to Joyride, a groundbreaking Asian American comedy coming out this summer.
Everyone remember their names?
Sassy,
Cutie,
Lisa,
too.
Many are calling this moment the golden era of AAPIs in Hollywood and beyond.
It's this slow blossoming that's been happening over time.
It feels like we're being recognized for everything that we've always brought to the table.
I remember what it was like to be the only Asian person in a Broadway company in the span of, say, oh my gosh, 30-something years. It has been really interesting to watch as we watch the space transform.
That transformation happening on almost every platform.
You started this.
Me. The Netflix series Beef, starring a predominantly Asian cast, has topped the streaming rankings. Meanwhile, books like Pachinko and The Summer I Turned Pretty, both written by Asians, hitting bestseller lists and turning into TV shows with Asian leads.
Do you think that we are kind of turning a new leaf when it comes to AAPI representation, especially in Hollywood?
I do. I think, if you look at films like Parasite, Crazy Rich Asians from a couple of years ago, and then this year, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then Beef, and so many other shows, we have a lot to celebrate and be proud of.
But there's still room for growth.
While the success of Everything Everywhere All at Once was a major milestone for the Asian community, only 2% of movies last year centered around Asian stories.
And a recent study shows 1 in 4 Americans can't name a famous living Asian American.
I think there are things happening now and types of stories being told that I never dreamed would ever get told. There's still a lot of work to do, in my opinion, and we're moving forward, which is good.
Kathy Park, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Yeah, but your news continues right now. Good Monday morning. Thanks for being here. I'm Stephen Romo in for Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, down to the wire. In Washington this morning, debt ceiling negotiations are intensifying. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says he'll meet with President Biden today after the two had a, quote, productive phone call yesterday. We'll tell you where those negotiations stand this morning as that June 1st default deadline draws closer. War of words. This morning, conflicting reports out of eastern Ukraine over who holds a critical position. Russia declared it is now in full control of the battle-scarred city of Bakhmut, but President Zelenskyy is fiercely denying those claims. And there's a new development that could reshape the war, a new $375 million military aid package from America, and a new commitment from allies to send F-16 fighter jets. Well, the latest on all that in just a moment. Also, Ready, Set, Jet, the unofficial start of summer and one of the busiest travel weekends of the year, just days away. So how can you ensure smooth sailing, getting to and from your getaway? We've got some tips coming up. Plus, an unforgettable moment at one college graduation, these tiny steps that meant the world to one student and the determination that helped him walk across that stage. What a moment. Excited to bring that to you in a little bit. We're going to begin this hour with that high-stakes meeting today aimed at avoiding debt ceiling catastrophe.
President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will meet this afternoon at the White House. This comes after the two had what was described as a productive phone call yesterday that happened while the president was returning home from the G7 summit in Asia. But time is quickly running out. With that default deadline approaching on June 1st, it's just 10 days away. NBC News' Ryan Nobles starts us off this morning.
President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will meet today amid a dire need to strike a deal. Yesterday, the president concluded his G7 summit trip in Japan, where touching on that economic crisis that remains at bay. Last night, the White House negotiating team left the Capitol after about 2.5 hours inside, but they didn't answer any questions from reporters. A high-stakes showdown in Washington expected today at the White House between President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy as the clock ticks down toward a default deadline.
We've got to be able to solve this problem.
The two will meet face-to-face without other congressional leaders after what was described as a productive call on Sunday. Biden sounding optimistic, returning from the G7 summit. At the summit, the president insisting default is off the table.
I've done my part. We put forward a proposal to cut spending by more than $1 trillion. Now it's time for the other side to move.
As well as revisiting, invoking the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling alone.
I think we have the authority.
Though Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen cast doubts on the idea Sunday and also reinforced that June 1st date as the deadline for an agreement.
I certainly haven't changed my assessment, so I think that that's a hard deadline.
The clock is ticking for a bipartisan compromise. Throughout negotiations, Republicans have demanded to curb overall spending and pressing on extending Trump-era tax cuts that could add over $3 trillion to the debt. Proposals the president says are unacceptable.
It's time for Republicans to accept that there is no bipartisan deal to be made solely on their partisan terms.
And even though the deadline remains June 1st, Biden and McCarthy will likely have to come to a deal much sooner for a couple of reasons. First, the legislative process takes time, and the Speaker will need to sell whatever deal he makes with Biden to the rest of the House GOP. That's no guarantee. Second, in 2011, during a similar showdown, even though negotiators came to an agreement at the last minute, the federal government's credit rating still dropped, which made it much more expensive to borrow money going forward.
All right, we'll be watching, Ryan. Thank you.
In Ukraine this morning, competing claims about the war-torn city of Bakhmut. On Saturday, Russia's Wagner mercenary group said it had captured the territory, which has seen some of the war's most intense fighting for months. While Ukrainian President Zelenskyy denied those claims, a top Ukrainian commander said his troops only retained an insignificant part of the city. So for more on this, we are joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter, who's in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Molly, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. That's right. It has been a very, very busy weekend. And of course, President Zelenskyy has been out of the country. When he comes back to this country, of course, he's coming back with a huge new military aid package. He's coming back with the promise of those F-16 fighter jets. And about that deadly battle of Bakhmut, Joe, it came at a massive cost for both sides. Take a look.
This morning, the bloodiest battle of this war for the eastern city of Bakhmut appears to be winding down for now. Over the weekend, Ukraine losing its last major stronghold. Visiting the front line, a top Ukrainian commander admitting his troops only retain an insignificant part of the city. And this morning, the deputy defense minister says Ukrainian troops continue to advance in the outskirts around the city. But on Sunday, Russian state TV anchors trumpeting mission accomplished, a win for Russian propaganda back home, reporting Putin congratulated Russian troops on their victory. State TV broadcasting images not independently verified by NBC News of soldiers waving flags. Both sides paid dearly. The exact number of military casualties unknown, estimates well into the tens of thousands. But as the sun set on Bakhmut last night, the smoldering remains of a city where 80,000 people lived before the war. Satellite images from 2022 and this month show a vast uninhabitable wasteland.
But you have to understand that there is nothing. They destroyed everything. There are no buildings. There is nothing on this place. So just ground and a lot of dead Russians.
Over the weekend, President Zelenskyy wrapping up a successful visit to the G7 in Hiroshima and will return home with an additional $375 million in U.S. military aid and finally the international commitment for F-16 fighter jets he's been asking for. A new phase of Western military aid, in part to fuel the expected counteroffensive. But back in Bakhmut, the leader of the Russian mercenary Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, says he'll pull his paid frontline fighters out of the city by Thursday, which may force Moscow's hand to send Russian reinforcements into Bakhmut to hold it.
Now, Joe, Bakhmut itself is not a strategic city really for either side, but this has been the longest, bloodiest battle of this war. And Ukrainian commanders have said all along that really their goal was to tie up Russian forces there in a protracted battle so Ukrainian forces elsewhere could really rearm and prepare for that expected counteroffensive we are watching this week and particularly Thursday very, very closely, Joe.
All right, Molly, thank you so much.
And back in the United States, the field of Republican presidential hopefuls is growing. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott is expected to formally announce his bid for the White House today. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to do that same thing later this week. They'll be facing an uphill battle, though, for the GOP nomination, with former President Donald Trump dominating that race. NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas is covering Scott's announcement in South Carolina and joins us now with more on this. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Stephen, good morning to you. Look, this could be the biggest week so far in this race. Two formidable candidates are set to enter the Republican primary, one hoping his life story and Christian values, along with his optimistic message, sways GOP voters, the other coming directly for former President Trump and his base.
This morning, there's new competition headed Donald Trump's way in the race for the GOP nomination. The newest presidential candidate, the Senate's only black Republican, South Carolina's Tim Scott, kicking off his 2024 White House bid in his hometown of North Charleston today.
Kids are growing up immersed in a culture where everyone's a victim.
The 57-year-old senator is expected to focus on his deep Christian faith and his hard-scrabble upbringing in South Carolina.
I thank God Almighty that my grandfather, who was forced out of school as a third grader to start picking cotton to help his family, lived long enough to watch his grandson pick out a seat in Congress.
Scott has been the GOP's leading voice on issues including policing and race relations, while rejecting the idea that the country is racist. And he's reached across the aisle with friends, including Democratic Senator Cory Booker.
I think that as I look at this Republican field, he may be one of those people that is underestimated.
With former President Donald Trump leading the GOP race, Scott joins an increasingly crowded lane of anti-Trump candidates, including his fellow South Carolinian, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and former Vice President Mike Pence, expected to announce shortly, along with the possibility of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie also entering the race. And according to two sources, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis set to officially announce his campaign this week as he sharpens his attacks on Trump, blaming him for a lackluster midterms.
I think the party has
developed a culture of losing.
It comes as DeSantis faces multiple battles back in his home state, including that ongoing feud with Disney. And now the NAACP issuing a formal travel advisory saying Florida is hostile to Black Americans. The group responding to what it calls DeSantis's aggressive attempts to erase Black history and to restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in Florida schools. Earlier this year, DeSantis blocked an advanced placement course in African American studies from being offered in Florida high schools.
Okay, so we reached out to Governor DeSantis' office about that travel advisory from the NAACP. We have not heard from his office. So the big question now is, how does somebody like Senator Tim Scott break out of the pack, right? Poll after poll shows this really to be a two-person race with former President Trump and Governor Ron DeSantis, and with President Trump having a monster lead among all the GOP candidates right now. Well, the Scott campaign believes that they can break through with their message, but also they've raised a lot of cash. They're going to go up with ads in Iowa and New Hampshire. Also, history shows recently on the Iowa GOP caucuses on that side, usually the Christian-centric candidate does better. You got to remember, Senator Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, these are candidates who won recently. Huckabee, they won the Iowa caucuses in the past prior years. Now, on top of that as well, Scott hopes his positive message and not really going after too aggressively former President Trump or Governor DeSantis, but sort of carving out another path helps him out. The problem is the race then moves here to South Carolina after New Hampshire. And of course, Governor Nikki Haley is also in this race, former Governor Nikki Haley. So it's going to be a challenge. We do want to mention a programming note. We're going to get the first sit-down interview with Senator Tim Scott after his announcement. It'll air first on Nightly News and then on Top Story later tonight right here on NBC News Now. Guys, back to you.
All right, we'll certainly be watching. Tom, thank you.
The unofficial start to summer is almost here. Millions are planning their vacation for Memorial Day this weekend.
Yeah, and despite all of the headaches that we had last summer, according to AAA, more than 42 million people are expected to travel this summer. That number is up 7% from last year. Experts say this could be the busiest Memorial Day weekend at airports since 2005.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us from Miami International Airport with more on what to expect. Sam, good morning. So let's take a look at the big picture here. Do we know what cities are going to be the most popular for travelers this year? What are you watching out for?
Yeah, so Joe, Stephen, good morning. As you mentioned, 7% increase year over year. But if you're looking specifically at those who are flying, it's up 11%. And you'll remember there was real demand last year as people were having that revenge travel, so to speak, after years of the pandemic. So you're really wondering what's going to come for this summer as far as which cities, according to AAA, are expected to be the busiest. Miami, where I am, other cruise port cities are certainly in that category. Seattle as well. The top three are the New York City airports, Orlando, and Las Vegas. But we are seeing more travel overall right now, at least the projections. And look at those palm trees. Joe, Stephen, I expect you to ditch the suit and ties for button-downs when you come down here to Florida, maybe a little linen as well.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice about that, Sam. I do want to focus more on that negative. Last year was such a mess. A lot of people are asking, what has been done? Has the government stepped in to sort of ease that pressure? We were talking about all those staffing issues. Where do those things stand now?
Yeah. The staffing issues are still acute, Stephen, especially when it concerns air traffic control personnel and pilots. So that remains a problem, but the federal government has stepped in to try to make the process a little smoother for travelers this year. One of the things they did was create nearly 170 new corridors or routes up and down the East Coast. There were legacy routes, they described them as, not as efficient as possible, so they really tried to streamline it. But as you look at this list right now, airports with the most delays in 2022, Chicago Midway, right at the top of the list, BWI, Orlando, JFK, and Harry Reid International in Las Vegas. That was last year, but these steps, the corridors and also fines for airlines, guys, to punish them for not being able to deliver at a reasonable rate in terms of cancellations and delays, those two things collectively hopefully are meant to improve the experience for travelers this summer.
And Sam, most folks are probably going to be driving, so for those who are hitting the roads this weekend, what's the best time to start that journey before traffic becomes like a severe nightmare? It'll probably be a nightmare no matter when you leave. And gas prices, talk about those and the impact they're having.
Yeah, I was going to say severe nightmare no matter what, Joe. It's a good question. Thursday and Friday are going to be the worst. You want to leave earlier in the morning, the better, or after 6 p.m. Do not go in the middle of the day. 12 to 6 p.m. is the worst. Saturday and Sunday, lighter traffic, largely because people are already at their destinations and enjoying time with their family members. Great question about gas. If you look at the situation from a year ago, we're actually down about $1 a gallon. It's $3.50 or so versus $4.50 last year. And yet, despite that fact, fewer people are slated to drive this year than last year, perhaps because they really do want to fly. So we're seeing the tickets for airfare moving upwards, guys.
They're already high enough as it is. All right, Sam, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, Brian Kohberger, the man accused of stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death, is scheduled to enter his plea in court today. It comes nearly a week after he was indicted by a grand jury.
NBC News Now anchor Gadi Schwartz joins us from outside the courthouse with more. Gadi, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, he's expected to be here in court in about 3 hours. This will be the first time that the families of the victims see if he's going to plead guilty or not guilty in this case. It has been 6 months since those murders, and there are new questions arising over the knife and sheath at the center of this case, a knife and sheath that may have been bought on Amazon.
This morning, accused killer Brian Kohberger will make his first court appearance since being indicted by a grand jury on 4 murder charges. A spokesperson for the court says the process should be quick.
This is basically procedural around advisory of rights, entry of plea, possibly bond.
Kohberger is expected to enter his plea today. He said through a previous defense attorney he believes he'll be exonerated. The indictment comes 6 months after the shocking killings of 4 college students, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Madison Mogen, in their shared home near the University of Idaho campus. Maddie Mogen would have turned 22 this week.
I want people to remember Maddie as just being a loving, caring, just beautiful person who everybody just misses so much.
According to court documents, DNA traced to Kohberger was found on a knife sheath at the crime scene. And in a recent Dateline exclusive, a source with inside knowledge of the investigation says detectives have found evidence that several months before the murders, Kohberger went on Amazon to buy a K-bar knife and sheath. Greg Cooper, a retired FBI profiler who has studied killers of multiple victims, sharing his theory.
He's been thinking about committing crimes for a long time.
With that knife?
Absolutely. He has to become familiar with it, feel at ease with it.
The Dateline report highlighting another disturbing incident. A source recounting that Kohberger befriended a woman in his graduate criminology cohort who, after finding things amiss inside her apartment, called Kohberger for help. The source says Kohberger volunteered to install a video security system himself.
After the installation, our source says, police believe Kohberger, if he was close enough to the woman's apartment, could pull up the cameras himself for a look, because Kohberger knew the woman's Wi-Fi password.
The source adding that Kohberger is now considered a strong suspect in the break-in, though he has not been charged in connection with the incident. Meanwhile, Kaylee Gonzalez's family looking toward the trial.
If this individual is the right one, then he picked the wrong family. We're ready for this case.
And the Gonzalez family attorney says that the Gonzalez family will be here. Steve Gonzalez, Kaylee Gonzalez's father, has said in the past that he wants to look Kohberger in the eye. Guys, back to you.
Such a heartbreaking time for those families. All right, Gotti, thanks.
Let's bring back our friend, meteorologist Michelle Grossman, for your morning News Now forecast.
Hey, good morning, Michelle. Great to see you again.
Good morning, guys. Great to see you, too. And we need the umbrella in spots this morning because we're watching a few areas where we're seeing some showers, even the chance for some storms as we go throughout the afternoon. This is what it looks like today. We're starting at the west coast, portions of the Intermountain West into the Rockies, seeing the chance for some showers. The southern plains as well, we have a disturbance that's working through. We're going to see several disturbances working through. So we could see some flash flooding there. Another spot where we could see some flash flooding is in the southeast along the Gulf Coast states. We have a front that's sort of draped over that area. It will stay in place over the next few days. So we're looking at the chance for even up to 7 inches of rain in some spots. And we could see rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. In the upper Midwest, it's going to be warm. The northern plains are going to be warm, too. And we're looking at a lot of abundant sunshine there. Could see a few showers on the border of New York and Pennsylvania. Otherwise, we are quiet in the Northeast, also New England. Then as we near Wednesday, showers and storms back into New England. Still some showers falling in Florida. We're going to be watching for some flooding conditions there with all the rain falling over the next several days. Strong storms still in portions of the southern plains. So we're going to be stuck in a pattern over the next few days. And you can see all this rain stretching from the Intermountain West into the Rockies once again. Sunny and hot in the southwest. And we're nice in the Pacific Northwest on Wednesday. Then as we get closer to the Memorial Day weekend, we're looking at Friday. Lots of rain, unfortunately, to kick off your weekend from the northern plains, central plains, southern plains, the Intermountain West once again. Warm Gulf Coast, that's a good news. We're going to dry out there. But notice in Florida, once again, looking at the chance for some showers. That's kicking off the weekend along with the Carolinas as well. We're a little bit cooler in the Northeast. And then let's look at the Memorial Day weekend because it's never too early. By Saturday, looking at Rockies, the storms there, rainy and cool along the Carolina coast. It's going to be sunny and hot in the along the Gulf Coast. Sorry, the Carolinas, rainy and cool. But notice Florida, we're still dealing with those showers as we near Saturday. And then Sunday, we're going to bring that shower threat into the mid-Atlantic, portions of the Northeast, more storms in parts of the Intermountain West, the northern plains, the central plains, desert heat. We're going to be heating it up there into the mid-90s, near 100 degrees in many spots. And Memorial Day weekend, showers and storms still in the Intermountain West. They cannot catch a break over the next 7 days. Warm for many in portions of the Tennessee Valley and unfortunately soggy along the coast in the mid-Atlantic and also the Carolinas. This is what it looks like right now. We're looking at radar and we're looking at that green. We're also looking at those darker colors. That's where we're seeing the rain falling right now. So guys, the big takeaway for today, we're looking at showers and storms in Texas, also Oklahoma, and really a lot of rain along the Gulf Coast and Southeast.
And your forecast here might impact Sam's report we just saw and change the locations folks want to visit for Memorial Day weekend.
It's not so true. It's like, make those changes. And where am I going to fly out of?
Exactly. Florida looks okay, I guess. So. You're safe in Florida.
For now.
It's always nice there anyway, even if it's raining.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure.
Welcome back. SpaceX is making history with a private space flight due to arrive at the International Space Station today.
The rocket successfully launched last night from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Peggy Whitson, a retired NASA astronaut, is leading the flight. Whitson holds the U.S. record for most accumulated time in space. She's being joined by a crew of 3 private citizens, which includes Saudi Arabia's first female astronaut. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello is at the launch. He's also been working on a new documentary for Meet the Press Reports called Race to Mars. Tom, good to have you with us. So how soon does NASA hope to actually land humans on Mars?
NASA is hoping that we can land people, humans, on Mars by 2040. But think about that. That's just 17 years away. And a lot of outside experts I talk to, they're a little skeptical about that. But here's the thing. There's the China factor at play. China wants to land its own astronauts on the moon by 2030. That's lighting a fire under NASA. So for NASA to get to Mars, it's now talking about going nuclear. 1 month after Elon Musk's Starship launched, then broke apart on liftoff.
A rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
Both SpaceX and NASA insist they're committed to the rocket. First to land astronauts on the moon, but ultimately to carry crews to Mars as soon as 2040. While science and exploration are the driving motivators, there's also a competitive factor: China.
The Chinese government is very secretive, and a lot of their plans involve their military preparations. And so there's a reason for us to get there first.
And NASA wants to get there faster. A round-trip mission to Mars could take 2 to 3 years. So to cut the travel time, America is going back to the future.
This project was called NERVA.
To the 1960s, and a government program most Americans have never heard of, to develop nuclear-powered rockets.
Someday, a manned trip to Mars and return may become the mission assignment.
It turns out they made big progress back in the 60s, running expensive tests. The goal now, send astronauts to the moon and beyond on nuclear rockets. When the Apollo astronauts went to the moon, they needed 5 of these massive F-1 engines just to get them off the Earth and escape the Earth's gravitational pull. 7.5 million pounds of thrust. Here at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, they've got an exact replica to scale of the Saturn V, 363 feet tall. Future astronauts will need that kind of lift, but once they're in space, they can use a much smaller engine, a nuclear engine, to go all the way to Mars and back, a fraction of the size. And that engine could last 20 years. This is a big place. It's happening now at the Marshall Test Flight Center in Huntsville.
This is where they put components of nuclear thermal rockets, such as this fuel element here, and like the one that you're holding.
These are the building blocks for America's future nuclear propulsion going to space.
Yes.
But America's best-known astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, wonders why we're going.
So I'm all for people in space, but to accomplish scientific goals, the robot can live off of sunlight and you can't. The robot is not going to cry because we ran out of money, we can't bring you back.
Well, guess what? We have used nuclear technology before with the Voyager 2 robotic spacecraft that we launched in 1977. It's still out there. It's still exploring the universe on 3 nuclear batteries. So that's kind of cool. And it's, by the way, still sending back images. But the memory on board Voyager 2, you guys, it's 3 million times less than what's in your cell phone. Back to you guys.
Incredible, Tom. Thank you so much. And by the way, Tom's Meet the Press Reports documentary is called Race to Mars. You need to check it out. It is playing on Peacock, NBCnews.com, and YouTube.
Fascinating stuff. Don't want to miss it. Okay, now to international headlines. 3 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli army raid in the West Bank this morning.
NBC's Claudio Lavonga joins us from Rome with that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yes, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, at least 3 people were killed and 6 others were injured during a large-scale raid at Balata, the refugee camp near a city of Nablus. Now, this comes as the Biden administration sharply condemned Israel's latest act of settlement expansion. Balata is the largest refugee camp in the West Bank. Israel has mounted frequent raids in the area over the past year, and residents of the refugee camp said this was the largest such operation there in many years. And we go to El Salvador, where at least 12 people were killed and more than 100 were hospitalized after a stampede of angry soccer fans knocked down an access gate to the stadium after being denied entry despite having tickets. The soccer match was suspended for about 16 minutes into the game after fans in the stands caught the attention of those in the field. The president of El Salvador said the country is in mourning. The president of the International Soccer Association expressed his condolences for the tragic incident during a speech at the World Health Organization meeting on Sunday. And we end up here in Italy, where 7 young activists climbed into the Trevi fountain and turned the water black. The protesters from Ultima Generazione, or Last Generation in English, held up banners while shouting, "Our country is dying." In a statement, Ultima Generazione called for an end to public subsidies to fossil fuels and linked the protest to recent deadly floods in northern Italy. Rome's mayor, Roberto Gualtieri, condemned the protest and tweeted, "Enough of these absurd attacks on our artistic heritage, guys."
Not going to be fun to clean that up. All right, Claudio, thank you. Welcome back. The global health emergency around the COVID-19 pandemic has only just been lifted, and now scientists are warning about another possible infectious virus, the bird flu.
Cases in birds are hitting their highest peak since the disease was first identified back in 1996, and now a small number of human infections has been reported.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us now to explain more on this. Dr. Patel, good morning. So we've heard about bird flu for a while now. Just how serious is it when humans catch it, and how possible is a mutation that could cause it to spread between people?
Yeah, Stephen, Joe, the good news right now is that we only have very rare cases of humans that have picked it up, and they've largely been in poultry workers or some connection with people who are really handling potentially sick or dead birds that carry the flu. What we're watching for, though, are mutations that will allow for this to jump from not just bird to person, but person to person, and we have no evidence of that yet. Having said that, we know that we need to be prepared. We've been prepared for several decades trying to anticipate it, but the vaccines we have might not necessarily work against the current strains of bird flu circulating.
Yeah, so let's talk more about that. If scientists are worried the existing vaccines wouldn't be sufficient, what do we know about our supply of those vaccines? Talk more about their effectiveness.
Yeah, so the vaccine's effectiveness with what we currently have likely is not necessarily the best vaccine, because that was developed on strains that were circulating about 20 years ago. So a great idea when we thought we were going to have that pandemic 15 to 17 years ago, but not necessarily today. And what we need to do now, and what the NIH and CDC are already preparing for, are things that could protect against this particular strain of H5. That's just the type of bird flu that this is. And that's exactly where we're at. And while it might sound to people this is like COVID, here's some really reassuring news. This is not a new virus. This is something that we've had a lot of experience with. So developing these vaccines are something that manufacturers and scientists know how to do. The question will be making enough of them.
And on another positive note, Dr. Patel, scientists have been working to prevent a major outbreak if this virus does spread further. Of course, we've also learned so much from the COVID-19 pandemic. What do we know about these prevention efforts?
Yeah, so these prevention efforts do work. Again, we do know how this is transmitted, unlike with COVID, if you remember those early days, Stephen, where we weren't even sure if it was airborne. We know how transmission can be done, and we're looking at the places where likely transmission to people could happen, namely in places where they're handling birds, so poultry farms, any place where they're processing any kind of bird matter, and of course, avoiding any sick or diseased birds. So those are precautions that not only are we taking, the globe is taking, and we will definitely try to monitor anybody with symptoms. The symptoms, as you asked in the first question, are really wide-ranging, anything from a sore throat to really severe respiratory disease. But if someone gets infected, it can have a high mortality rate. We've got the signs, we have the vaccine and the technology. We just have to prevent it from spreading and watching for the spread to people.
Certainly something we'll be watching out for. Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you.
Man from Puerto Rico attempted to rent a car in New Orleans, but says he was denied despite showing multiple forms of identification. NBC News reporter Maya Eaglin spoke to the man about how the experience left him feeling.
It is a valid ID. It is a prepaid reservation. I already.
Would you like me to call the police?
Yes, please call the police.
Humberto Marchan, a U.S. citizen who lives in Puerto Rico, arrived at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport last week and attempted to rent a car from Hertz.
I gave him my credit card and my license, and that at some point they raised the issue of the license being from Puerto Rico, as an out-of-country license. Out of state, out of country license, they refer to it, and requiring a physical passport to go ahead with the check-in process.
He says he offered to show employees a photo of his passport instead, but they wouldn't accept it. Eventually, the Hertz employee called the police. How did you feel when they denied your Puerto Rican license?
This is another example of second-class citizenship limbo that we Puerto Ricans live in. All of a sudden, you're being treated as someone who has never rented a car or something like that. But beyond that, falling a victim of ignorance.
But he was wrong. Marchand says he was told to leave the premises by police. NBC News reached out to the Kenner Police Department for comment, but they didn't respond. Marchand says he also had a real ID, which should be federally recognized in all 50 states and U.S. territories. Puerto Rico has been a territory of the United States since 1898, and Puerto Ricans have had American citizenship since 1917. In a statement to NBC News, the rental company said in part, Hertz accepts Puerto Rican driver's license from our customers renting in the U.S. without requiring a valid passport. The statement later goes on to apologize. Hertz also refunded Marchand the money he spent on his reservation. Cases like Marchand's are not unique. In a 2017 national poll, nearly half of Americans did not know Puerto Ricans were U.S. citizens.
Puerto Ricans may have restrictions on, say, the right to vote, but when it comes to interstate travel, Puerto Ricans carry the exact same passport as United States citizens.
Travel experts recommended checking what type of car insurance is needed, reading the fine print of the company's policy, and carrying multiple forms of ID to be extra safe.
Some do require another form of ID, like a passport, just to, again, supplement that identification process.
But Humberto says these issues go much deeper than that.
I think it's lack of education, lack of awareness, and a culture of ethnocentrism.
Our thanks to Maya Eaglin for that report. Hertz also agreed to re-educate its employees on the matter so this can be prevented in the future. As for Humberto, he ended up using an Uber to get to his destination because by the time he was asked to leave Hertz, he says all the other rental car companies were closed. We're back with financial headlines. A worldwide outage left many Instagram users unable to use the app.
CNBC's Savannah now joins us with that and other news. Good morning, Savannah.
Steve and Joe, good morning. Yeah, so Instagram is back up for most users today. A technical issue disrupting service for thousands of people yesterday. Instagram's parent company, Meta Platforms, didn't disclose how many users were affected. More than 180,000 people reported issues with accessing Instagram at the peak of the outage, and that was according to downdetector.com. El Nino is on its way, and it could exact a major toll on the global economy. Research from Dartmouth estimates that the weather pattern could cost up to $3 trillion in damages through the end of this decade. El Nino influences weather worldwide when it forms, potentially leading to more severe floods in some places while worsening droughts in others. The study says a previous El Nino in 1997 and 98 cost the world nearly $6 trillion and hit U.S. GDP by 3% in the years after. And the hottest housing market in the country is in the Atlanta Braves' backyard. Bankrate says Gainesville, Georgia, that's a suburb. Gainesville, Georgia, it's a suburb of Atlanta, tops its annual list. Now, it ranks the top areas based on home appreciation, job and population growth, as well as the lowest number of active residential listings and the average time they're on the market. The Southeast is home to all of the top 10 hottest markets, including Fort Myers, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Charlotte, Knoxville, and Nashville, guys.
All right, Savannah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Well, L.A. has the reputation for being one of the best food truck hubs in the country. To celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Month, NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz headed to a trendy food truck with a meaningful name, Soulmates, that's bringing some major Korean fusion to many.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, are you Christina?
Yes.
Gotti, great to meet you.
Great to meet you. Welcome to Soulmates.
Yeah, what's on the menu today?
Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff. Are you ready to eat?
I am ready to eat.
Korean food is big in Los Angeles, not only because it's delicious, but because SoCal actually has one of the largest populations of Koreans outside South Korea. Christina opened Soulmates right here in LA just last year, then came her food truck.
The beautiful idea of a bulgogi and the hoagie.
Exactly.
Right here.
Exactly, so it's a bulgogi.
There's nothing like Korean barbecue. And the smell is just... When you smell this, what do you think of?
It brings me back to home. When I went to college, I realized how much I missed my mom's food, and I wasn't grateful for it then. But then every time now I smell Korean barbecue or I eat Korean food, it brings me back to my mom's cooking, like my mom's form of love, and so that's essentially like how the restaurant came to be. Yeah. So what you're eating is pretty much so bulgogi, it's a Korean staple in barbecue. So that one is a Korean fried chicken taco.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So chimek, it means like Korean chicken with beer. It's a huge culture in Korea.
Now kimchi. Did you love it growing up?
Kimchi is a staple. I love it. It's something that it's in every Korean's home.
Your mom would make it?
Yeah, and that's a tradition passed down from my grandmother.
So would you make the chili paste with her and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we fermented it in the fridge, but my mom's mom, when we would go to Korea, she lived on the mountainside, so she would do it the traditional way where put it in the jars and over winter time, put it under the soil.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why a lot of Korean dishes have a lot of pickled food. So what we have here is the bibimbap. Bibim means mixed in Korean, and bap means rice. So yeah, you pour that spicy sauce on there, and then you mix everything together.
Yeah, all right. I'm glad we put the seaweed first. That's delicious.
This is mom's cooking right here.
This is no fusion. No, this is just mom's love right here.
Exactly. That is a traditional Korean mother's cooking right there.
She's got to be stoked when she sees this being sold here.
Well, yes, that, and my mom actually helped me finalize a lot of the recipes here. I had to get the okay from my Korean oma, okay?
When she cooked for you, what did it feel like growing up?
It might sound so silly, but it's love. It is my mom's form of showing her family, you guys are everything.
So this says what words can't even describe.
Exactly. It's more of it's a feeling. It's an emotion that you're eating.
So when you were growing up, you were embarrassed by this?
I was actually really bullied in elementary school for being Asian because I grew up in a predominantly, white neighborhood. And so I struggled with my identity a lot. It took growing up with my mom's food and moving away to fully appreciate it all. And now I'm in beautiful, sunny California and living the dream.
Doesn't get better than this.
No.
Quite the journey, and our thanks to Gotti Schwartz for that report. Well, despite being delayed from setting down permanent roots during the pandemic, Christina has managed to expand Soulmates to now serve vegan options and also offer catering. Welcome back. The Foo Fighters have named their new drummer following the death of Taylor Hawkins last year. On a live stream Sunday, they announced Josh Freese will take over. He was previously playing with acts including Guns N' Roses and Sting. And staying with that Nirvana theme, a guitar once smashed by Kurt Cobain has sold for $600,000 at auction. The broken Black Fender Stratocaster was predicted to sell for just 1/10 that price. Cobain smashed a series of guitars during his intense performances. This guitar has been put back together, but it is no longer playable.
An unforgettable moment played out during a college graduation ceremony in Virginia. That's where a student who suffered a spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed got his degree. That's not all. Here's NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez.
These small steps mean a lot to Khalil Watson.
It's been a journey. It's been lots of ups and downs.
In 2016, Khalil was shot in the neck. The resulting spinal cord injury left him paralyzed from the neck down.
I had to learn how to eat, speak, and breathe on my own.
One of the things he missed while in the hospital, his high school graduation. Khalil was determined to continue his education, studying social work in college.
I have a passion for helping others. After going through the things that I've experienced, I feel like I'll be able to easily connect with and understand individuals who have similar worse situations.
Now, thanks to some help from this robotic exoskeleton and therapist at Sheltering Arms Institute in Virginia, Khalil stepping up onto this stage at Reynolds Community College, walking to receive his associate degree in pre-social work.
I did this for God, myself, friends, my family. I mean, only a few people know what it took for me to get to this point.
Now, with his diploma in hand, Khalil is sharing this message.
Anything is possible. In life, we're going to experience ups and downs. We just have to keep going.
Good message there. Our thanks to Gabe for that report. As for what's next for Khalil, he's transferring to Virginia Commonwealth University to work on his bachelor's and master's degrees in social work.
Very cool. And speaking of graduation, Today's Show anchor Savannah Guthrie spent the weekend in Washington, D.C., inspiring the latest class of graduates at her alma mater. Take a look.
This is the Georgetown Law Class of 2023. Brilliant minds ready for the future. More than 2 decades ago, the caps and gowns were on me and the dear group of friends that got me through law school.
Ladies who brunch.
This weekend, we reunited.
Can you believe it? Can you guys believe it's been 21 years? No.
And I remember us just like being so grateful to have each other first year of law school.
I remember trying to be Lindsay's friend, and she really resisted being my friend for a long time.
You were too busy sitting in the front row.
Yes.
Taking all the notes.
We weren't quite sure because we were like, oh,
She seems really intense.
Yeah. That was fear.
Yeah.
Now you know me.
Well,
that was
and
total
thank God
fear.
you were taking those notes because that's how I got through law school, actually.
She would get up at 4 in the morning in law school. I mean, you really did. This whole waking up early thing is like not just a Today Show thing.
You know, we all worked really hard. We were all terrified. We were all petrified. We were all pushing ourselves as hard as we could push. And we all found out what we could do. And I think that's the value of doing something like going to law school. That's what I'm going to try to tell the students today. Yeah. You know, like push yourself, stretch yourself, find out who you are. This is the only way. You have to do it by doing hard things. Guys, we're going back to law school.
We were welcomed back by Dean William Traynor.
These are all my law school besties right here.
And a familiar face.
Fran was one of my professors. Yes.
And my good friend, we've stayed friends all these years.
She's the first person I cold called. So it was a class of, I don't know, 125 people. I thought, I want to call on someone day one, but I don't want to intimidate them too much. So I cold called on her in the middle of, she was in the middle of the room and shocked that I called on her. But she was a great student.
Our trip down memory lane cut short as students started to line the halls for the procession. Time to suit up. All right, well, let's do it. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. I have not set foot here in 21 years. But if you happen to see my old self walking around today, I was hoping you'd tell her a few things. You'll recognize her. She's the one with the frizzy hair and the doe-like expression and the posture like Quasimodo from lugging that con law book around. Do you know the one I'm talking about? It must have weighed 75 pounds alone. Here, I brought it. Are you kidding me? That's one book. Do you guys even use books anymore? I worked in local television news, rising from market to bigger market with my reporter's notebook and helmet hair and red blazer, when I decided to blow it all up and go to law school. Lesson 1, high school slackers can turn it around. Lesson 2, don't play it safe. There is no substitute for what you all are about to experience. You have the chance to take everything you've learned these last 3 years, every part of your being, not just what you know, but who you are, your personality, your character, and take it out for a test drive. Push yourself, stretch yourself, see what you can do, put the pedal to the metal. Your story is just beginning, or at least a thrilling new chapter. What a surpassing joy it is to stand here with you and root for you, beckoning you into your great future. If you do see my old self walking around somewhere today, this was what I was thinking you could tell her. Don't worry so much. Don't sweat every tiny thing like it's the ultimate end-all, be-all thing. Except for the 0.2% I missed summa cum laude by. I am still mad about that. Tell her it's good to have a plan, but it's also good to take it, rip it up, and do something wild and daring, even if it feels like you're taking everything you've worked so hard for and lighting it on fire. Tell her, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Maybe law school was a big gamble for you, as it was for me. Or maybe it was your safety net. Maybe it was your way of avoiding the scarier path. Whatever the case, I'm telling you, anything interesting you want to do, anything meaningful you want to accomplish, it is waiting for you. It is possible for you, but it is on the other side of a big risk, on the other side of a big bet. No, not crypto. A bet on yourself, real skin in the game. It might work out, it might not, but the riskier step will be not to try. I'm so proud of you, graduates. I'm truly honored to be here. Because I was here once, I know exactly what it took for you to get to this moment. I'm looking at every single one of you and marveling, and I am cheering you on into your brave, wild, and wonderful future. Congratulations.
So wise, and our thanks to Savannah for sharing her special weekend with us.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Your news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.